recording. Chen, I think we're going to take things away with our topic today of uploading and editing metadata with the Flywheel SDK.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Hi, my name is Chen, and today I'm going to talk about how you upload and edit metadata with our SDKs. And just to go over what I'm be talking about here, we're going to talk about how you can create a new project with our SDK. Once you have created a project container, we're going to show you how you can create the subject session and acquisition container that matches with the data input that we have. In this case, is a data set that you downloaded. And we're going to show you how you can upload the DICOM file into the acquisition container as well. And once you have done setting up the new project, we're going to show you how you can update the metadata for a specific container. And in this case, it's a subject container. Okay, let's get started. As Jeff mentioned, I kind of assume you guys have gone through the setup part session before the webinar and downloaded a few of the test data that we have here. And just this is what it looks like. And then the test data here, there's a link. If you haven't done it yet, you can just copy and paste the link, which is easier, or you can just run the cell here to download the data and unzip it. Okay, and move on. And just an overview how the data set looks like. So this is the folder name, and there's a subject and session and acquisition that follow the Flywheel hierarchy that Jeff mentioned earlier. And we have also a participant CSV file that we'll be using later on. And I'm going to skip the part for the install and import dependencies and the Flywheel API key and the client section, just so because it's kind of self-explanatory. And yeah, so I'm going to start from the initialize values. So before you start creating a project, you have to define a few label and a few values that you'll be using here. So first of all, I'm going to define the project label. So throughout this webinar, I'm going to use the project that name Anxiety Study 01 here. And you can change to whatever that makes sense for you. And the next part here, I'm going to define the group ID for that I have the right permission to create a new project in. And the name of the group ID is a webinar, in this case, webinar group, sorry, in this case. And the next part is I'm going to define a path that direct me to the data set that I have, to the path to the data that I have on my local machine. So it is a folder named Data Upload Notebook here. Okay, and once you have defined these three values, we're going to move on to how we can create a new project with our SDK. So before you actually start, you will have to get the group container by using the lookup method that we have. So it will be having a Flywheel client. So in this case, it's a FW, and we're going to use a lookup function here, and then it take in the group ID as an attribute. And I'm going to name it as my group here. And once you have done getting the group container, it's always a good idea to find where the project label that you defined earlier exists within the your Flywheel instance. So we're going to try to find the project that by using the find first method here, and we give it takes in the attribute of label equal to the project label that we had defined earlier, and we're going to name it as project. If there is a project that name the same name as what you defined earlier, it will return as true. Basically, what this few line is doing is telling you there is a project that has the same name as what you have defined earlier, and prompting you to enter a new label for the new project that you're going to create here, and going to go through the same path, like try to find it. And if the project label doesn't exist within your Flywheel instance, it will show a print out message saying that it's looking good, and you can move on here. And so if that is not true, we use the add project function here to add the project with the add the project here. So it will take in the project label, and you will have a, for some reason it couldn't show on the screen, but it has a message saying that you already added to the group that you defined earlier. Okay.
Pause it real quick and just remind
Sure.
everybody, if you want to ask a question, there's a Q&A feature in Zoom that you want to just pop your question in there, and we have Andy Worth and Megan Mahon as well with us today. So if there's any questions that we can answer while Chin is talking, we can do that. Otherwise, we'll let Chin pause every once in a while to go through and back up if there's anything that anybody wants us to go over again. So please feel free to chime in. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And let's move on. So the next part I'm going to talk about is to create the subject session and acquisition container and how you can upload the files. So our plan today is kind of look through each subject and create the subject container, and we'll be doing the same for the session and acquisition container. So let's see how it looks like. And before I started, I kind of put in some information on what we're going to use. So we're going to use a regular expression pattern to detect which one is a subject file and which one is the session file that we want to upload into the Flywheel instance. And this is a nice example on how the regex works, and you can just build it after the webinar. I'm not going to go over this, and I also have a tip here that's showing we're going to use the globe method here to find any matching files with the given parents. Okay, so this is the code that we'll be using to upload the create the new each subject session and acquisition container, and also uploading the file. So first of all, we're going to get the file name that start with ANX, and the star, the asterisk means that represent anything after the ANX, and we'll name it. We'll use a for loop to loop through each subject here, and when it has detected a subject, you will see a message saying that it's processing here, and then it will use the add subject method that we have to add the subject into the create a new subject container in the project. And the same method that we'll be using the same method here for the session and the acquisition container. And as you can see on the acquisition container, we're going to just grabbing the T1 acquisition. And if you look at the data set that you have downloaded earlier, this one subject contain fMRI acquisition folder, and that folder will not be uploaded since we only trying to upload the T1 only here. And here on the DICOM file, on the uploading file, we're going to just getting the DICOM.zip file here, and we use the upload file as a function to upload it. I'm just going to pause 1 minute just so in case you guys trying out on your own, because it takes a little while to run it. Okay, and just to kind of show you guys how it looks like on the UI. So after you have downloaded it, it looks like this. So it looks kind of similar how you use the CLI to download. So you have the session here, and then the acquisition here and the DICOM file here, and there's a subject label name that uploaded as similar to the file name convention. Okay, and once you have done creating each container, so we're going to teach you how you can update the subject metadata. So before we go into how you can update all the subject container, all the subject metadata, I'm going to show you how you can update one subject metadata for now. So this is how it looks like on the UI. So in the subject container, there's a few basic metadata on the UI, and the metadata here will be vary depending on what subject type it is. So for this human, there is a first name, last name, sex, cohort, race, and ethnicity. And then, so first of all, when you want to update the metadata, you have to find the subject that you want to update the metadata for. So we're going to use the find first method here. So we use the project container dot subjects dot find first method, and it take in the arguments of the label, and this is the subject label that we want to find. And it's always a good practice to use the reload method, because it kind of reload the entire container so that you can retrieve the information that you want. And we're going to name it as ANX underscore S1 here. So I'm going to, here we kind of print out how it looks like initially before we update the metadata. So as you can see, there is nothing on the sex, the first name, and the last name. And we can compare it later on how it looks like. And so as I mentioned, I'm going to update the first name, last name, and the sex of the subject. So we're going to use the update method here. So, and as you can recall, I defined the subject as ANX underscore S1. So this is a subject container I want to update, and I use the update method here. So within the update method, you will put in the argument of the metadata you want to update. So in this case, it's the first name, last name, and sex, and the first name as John, and the last name as Doe, and the sex as male. And once this has completed, it will have a printout statement saying that it has modified. And so how can we check whether it actually gone through? So we're going to use the same method earlier. We're going to try to find the subject again and reload it, and we're going to print it out again. As you can see, it has successfully updated here. It changed from none to male, none to John, and none to Doe for the three metadata. And the next part I'm going to talk about is the custom information on the container. So on the Python, it's named, it is under the info section, but on the UI it's named as custom information. And as I have the snippet here, this is how it looks like on the UI, and it has 5 different data types that you can create for the custom information. And on the Python, I also kind of print out how it looks like on the Python section, and you can look over it after the webinar if you're interested. So in this webinar, I'm going to show you how you can upload object data type to the subject container. So before we start, it's look kind of odd here, but before we start, we're going to define the object data type that we want. So we're going to use the very complicated nested dictionary, and we name it as complicated nested date. and within this is a dictionary and key, as there's a key here, and then the value is another dictionary with a key and value as a list here. For the key tool, it has a list, and then inside the list there is a key, another dictionary in it. So I'm going to use update info to update the custom information to on the subject container, and you just simply have to put in the dictionary or the data type that you want to update into the container. And it doesn't have a modify message showing for this one, unfortunately. So yeah. And in order to check whether it actually updated, we will use the find first method again and use a reload again to reload the entire container. And as I mentioned, the custom information is stored under .info. And as you can see, it has successfully updated the custom information to the subject container. Okay, and let's move on to the, and this is how it looks like on the UI. So this is the main dictionary, and then there's a key 1 and key 2, and within the key 2 there's another dictionary. Okay, let's move on to the next part. So here I'm going to show you how you can update all the subject metadata with a CSV file. As I mentioned, there's a participant CSV file that we're going to use here. So in order to read a CSV file, we're going to use the pandas library, and it's imported as PD here. And I have information about what pandas is if you're not familiar with it. And it basically just kind of create a data frame that look alike as table on Python. And then it's pretty useful to like data analysis and like data manipulation kind of stuff. So before we start, we're going to read the CSV file. So here we're going to use the pd.read CSV, and this is the path that we defined earlier, and then you just simply have to use a slash and then put in the file name that you want to refer to, and we named it as metadata here. Once you run that, this is just an overview how it looks like on the Python. And so there's a participants columns, and there's a sex column, there's age, and the treatment column in the CSV file. So the next part here, so how are we going to update all the subject metadata into the Flywheel instance? So here we're going to loop through each subject and see whether there's any metadata that's stored under the metadata data frame that we read earlier. And we're going to use the any function to check whether there's any subject label that stored inside the CSV file. I'm just going to jump through it. So I have a few information about what method I use. You can look over it if you are interested. And I'm just going to go into the code here. So here, as I mentioned, I'm going to iterate through the entire subject within the project container. So I'm going to use a project.subjects.iter, and I'm going to use a for loop to loop through each subject. And here we name it as the subj. So this if statement is to check if there's any subject label matches with the data within the participants ID columns on the CSV file. And we use the .any method here. And if this is true, it will run the entire cell here. So if that is true, we're going to grab the specific rows for the participants that we're looking for, and we name it as temp info here. And once we have done that, we're going to separate two different information we want to upload. So the first information, the first part is the age and treatment information. They fall into the custom information within the subject container. So I'm going to name it as our metadata here. And so we're going to grab the age and treatment as I mentioned, and I'm going to convert them into a dictionary that has the value being stored as a list. So the L stands for list. And the next part is a sex metadata for the subject. So I'm going to use the .ilog here and then use the select the first row only, and I'm going to just select the sex part, the sex column, and I name it as sex. So as you recall earlier, in order to update the information for the subject container, you will have to use the update method. And here I update the subject into human type, and then the sex as the sex that we defined earlier here. And for the custom information, we're going to use the update underscore info method, and we're going to simply put in the other metadata inside as the argument here. And if there is one subject doesn't have any metadata stored in the CSV, you will have a printout statement saying that, oh, this subject doesn't have any metadata stored inside the CSV file. Okay, I'm gonna pause a minute, see if there's any questions.
Nothing so far. I'm looking at the Q&A. I just remind people, if you want to throw something in the Q&A function or even the chat, just feel free and we can answer. We also we can hang on after Chin's all done and answer a few questions off topic as well if anybody wants. So feel free to put whatever you have in the Q&A. Go ahead.
Okay. Let's move on. So the next part is just an appendix. Just we have a few helpful functions that you might want to include in your scripts, and I didn't cover it in this this notebook because it's kind of complicated, and I just will go over like one of them since we have some time on hand. So here we have like a few functions that kind of essentially doing a get or create a subject container from your project. And what this is doing is either you can get the subject container if it exists, or you can create a new subject container. And once you have created or get the container, you can also update the subject container or the container itself with any key arguments that you have provided here. So I'm just going to jump over to the scripts that we have. So I'm just going to go over the subject container since I was explaining it earlier. So as I mentioned, this part is pretty similar to what I presented earlier, and it's only this part here we call the get or create subject functions that we have, and you simply put the project container that you defined earlier, and then put in the subject label that you want to find or create. And here we set the update as true, so it will update the container for the subject type as human here, and for all the subject we're going to set it as female. So yeah, that's my end of my presentation. If there's any questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Shin. That was
No
great.
worries.
I don't see any questions from back, but one of the things that I was looking at as I was watching your presentation is that I myself have always been a little curious on why we want to do that reload function. I was queuing up Andy here with with that question, and I think maybe Andy can go into a little bit more detail about what that is and why we'd want to do it and what some of the mechanics are around it.
Yeah, as Chen said, when you upload some data to the platform, you've already downloaded it to your local session, and that download is before you uploaded it. So you need to do the reload to get it back to your local session. That's one example, but there is also another example. When you hit some of the endpoints on the platform, it will give you, let's say you grab a subject by using a find. It will return a bunch of information, but it won't give you everything. And because sometimes, attached to a subject, you'll have acquisitions or whatever files and analyses, or to whatever container. So you have to reload that container, and then after you reload it, it populates all those fields.
Is that more? I think my understanding was that that's done for efficiency reasons for that kind of search. Is that?
Exactly, because if you do a search and you get everything as the result, it's going to be overwhelming for everything. So you want to get just pieces of it, and then you can drill down and get more and more that you want.
Yeah, so that's one of those little nuances of our SDK and our API that aren't obvious. I wanted to call that out. So yeah, there's a couple of reasons for that reload function that is in there, and I wanted to kind of highlight that as a reason. And we do have another question. How can I move an uploaded file to another container if I, for example, uploaded it to the wrong subject? That's a great question from Mai.
Yeah, so you can update, just as you update the metadata, you can update, for instance, if you have a particular session on a subject, you can do an update on that session's subject. Right, a subject has a session in it. One container is a child of another. And you just update the session's subject, and it will move it to that different container. So everything's kind of linked with these identifications, these IDs, and that will actually move it right over there. So it depends on different containers, which ones you want to update to move it to what other container, if that makes sense.
Sure, I think that was, yep, great. So I think that answers the question. Perfect. Any other questions from the crowd? Otherwise, as again, I think I mentioned at the top, for those maybe that were late to join, we've got a couple other webinars planned. I can bring that screen up here again. That we've got planned in August around bids templating and kind of to that point that Andy was making there about the finders and search. We're going to go into more detail in that in August as well. As always, our upcoming webinars and announcements can be found at our docs.flywheel page, where you can sign up to get notified of those future webinars and other fun announcements from our Flywheel team. We've got some really exciting things planned for the coming months, and we're going to be rolling out some new features that you can find on our release notes pages there. Some other exciting collaboration items that we'll be highlighting on that docs.flywheel page. So stay tuned there. I'll tease that a little bit. So don't go anywhere. We will be, no matter what happens here in the next few months, I know there's a lot of uncertainty around, but with Flywheel, one of the great things about us being a cloud platform is that you can do it from anywhere, and whether it be an office or Andy's home lab there, or wherever he may be, and the Zoom background. But the Flywheel is here, so you can always be we can always be reached at support@flywheel.io, or you can find us straight from that docs page as well. So I'm not seeing any further questions. So unless there's anything else we want to chat about, I'm happy to give you back some of your day, and Hope you guys have a good Thursday. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Chen.
Yep. See you guys.